Story 1. I do not know who remembers, but after September 11th, 2001, there was a celebrity fundraiser. If you donated more than $100, you got to talk to a random celebrity. We could barely afford it at the time, but we donated the $100 and they put Whoopi Goldberg on the line. She thanked us and said a few things. We mostly just smiled. At the end, she was wrapping up, and I told her she was awesome as the center square. She laughed. One of my friends still periodically reminds me that I once made Whoopi Goldberg laugh. Story 2. I live in Maine. My brother is a hobbyist photographer, a really good one in my opinion, so one Christmas he gave my girlfriend and me some nice prints of photos he had taken of us. He threw in a few scratch tickets to fill out the gift bag. Lucky for us, we won $30,000 on one of the tickets. We used most of it to pay off interest on our student loans, but spent the rest on a vacation to Ireland, a place my girlfriend and I had always wanted to visit. It was amazing. A few years later, my brother, who lives in Washington, District of Columbia, had a new girlfriend. She had spent a year studying abroad in Ireland in college, so we chatted about how much we both loved the country. The conversation moved on to something else, as conversations tend to do. Later someone piped up, "Hey, did you know my brother's girlfriend spent a year in Ireland?" Back on the subject of Ireland, we started discussing some of the more obscure things we did on the trip. I mentioned a stand-up comedy show we found one night in the basement of a pub, a very small space with about 20 people in the audience. My brother's girlfriend said she had been to a show there once too. I started remembering traits of the comedians. One was a black Scottish man, another was a young woman with the side of her head shaved, and the MC was even funnier than the main acts. Her jaw dropped. She remembered the same comedians. I thought it was too much of a coincidence, so I looked up the old event schedules to see if those same acts had performed on multiple dates. They had not, only once. What a crazy coincidence. My girlfriend and I had been at the same 20-person basement comedy show as my brother's future girlfriend, in a completely different country, on a trip that had been funded by a scratch ticket from that brother. Pretty neat. Story 3. When I was 44 years old, I remembered being 18 and traveling alone from the United States to visit my parents who lived in Russia. My connecting flight in a very rough city in the United States was canceled. I cannot remember exactly what happened, but I believe there was a weather problem and all flights were grounded. It was very late at night. I was young and naive and had no idea what to do. So I just stood in the airport looking lost and trying not to cry. A gentleman in a suit, probably in his mid to late 20s, possibly early 30s, noticed me looking distraught and realized I was going to be stranded at the airport. He offered to help me find a hotel. He said he was on the phone with his travel agent and managed to find 2 rooms. Then he offered to share a taxi with me. Looking back, it was dangerous, but I got into the taxi with the stranger and went to the motel. I had no cash, and this was before taxis accepted credit cards and before ride-hailing apps. When we got to the motel, I tried to figure out a way to use my credit card to pay, but he paid for the taxi. The motel was seedy and in a very rough area, but there were no other rooms because the airport had canceled flights. While we were checking in, a sex worker came into the lobby and asked if we had any condoms. I was too naive to be terrified. When I offered my credit card for the room, he said no and paid for both rooms. He then asked how I was going to get back to the airport in the morning. I said I would figure something out, but I had no idea and no way to get cash. This man walked me to my door and did not stop to suggest drinks or to ask me to stay. He kept walking past my room and said over his shoulder, "Please make sure you lock the door." I am sure this motel accommodated pay-by-the-hour clientele. In the morning, the front desk called my room to say my boyfriend had left an envelope for me. Inside was a $20 bill and a note that said, "Use this to get back to the airport." He never told me his last name or how to find him afterward. He expected nothing in return. I have no idea who he was, but I wish I could find him and thank him. Thinking of this story has restored my faith in humanity many times. What a good person. If this man is found, he will remember the city where we were stranded. Story 4. I realize this post already has over 1,200 comments, but writing things down feels good sometimes. When I was in college, I was dating a man who lived in an off-campus apartment. One night when he was walking me to the lobby so I could head home, There was a woman on the floor just outside the elevator. She was wearing a skirt and her blouse was on backward. She was looking in her purse for her keys. We stepped around her at first because we lived in a city with many college students and drunken people on the ground are not uncommon. Something felt wrong, so I turned around, went back to her, and asked if she needed help. She was slurring badly and kept saying she lived there and needed her keys. I offered to help her get to her apartment. I was eventually able to prop her up, get her in the elevator, and walk her down the hallway to the door number she kept repeating. I asked if she had roommates or a boyfriend, and she kept saying he was inside. I knocked, but there was no answer. I knocked louder, but still no answer. She was back on the floor and was drooling and spitting, the way some people do when they might vomit. She could not assist. I went through her purse to try to find information or keys, because she could not even tell me her name. On top of her things in her purse, I found underwear, balled up. I pushed it aside and kept digging until I found her work badge with keys attached. I tried the keys in the door, but they did not work. She insisted those were the keys and that they worked despite my showing her they did not. I knocked again with no answer. I searched her purse and found mail with her name on it, but the address was in a different borough of the city. My stomach dropped. This woman was heavily intoxicated, her blouse was on backward, her underwear was in her purse, and she had been insisting she had come out of this apartment where her boyfriend lived. But nobody answered, and she actually lived on the other side of town. After about 45 minutes, I got the woman to unlock her phone. I did not know anyone in her contacts, so I called the contact labeled Mom. After a few tries, her mother answered, clearly having been asleep. I explained that I was a stranger, but that I had her daughter with me and was trying to get her home. Her mother confirmed the address on the mail was where she lived. We talked for a few minutes and I gave her my number. Next, I focused on getting a taxi and bringing the woman home. I eventually got her inside, put her in bed, placed her phone on the charger, put a couple of bottles of water next to it, and set a trash bin nearby. I texted her mother to let her know her daughter was home and in bed, and then I left. The next day, I was on the bus between classes when her mother called. She thanked me for helping her daughter the night before and said she wanted to tell me what happened. The woman had gone on a date with a man she met on a dating application. They had 2 drinks at a restaurant, but the woman became intoxicated very quickly. It turned out that when she went to the restroom, the man had drugged her drink after it returned to the table. He took her back to his apartment and assaulted her, then dumped her in the lobby where I found her. The door we had been pounding on was the assailant's door. The woman did not remember much after the drink, but she was sore and smelled of latex when she went to the bathroom. If I had taken her to the hospital instead of bringing her home, she could have received treatment sooner and had a report written. That day, I wrote everything I remembered from the night before in excruciating detail in a Microsoft Word document. I told her mother that I had done this and that I was willing to testify or talk to the police or do anything needed. Her mother said she would tell her daughter, but her daughter just wanted to move on. A few months later, I texted to ask how her daughter was doing and to remind them I was still able to provide a statement. That was the last time I spoke to them. That was years ago, but whenever I get a new computer, I make sure to transfer that Microsoft Word document to a safe place, just in case they ever come back and need it. Story 5. I was at the zoo once when I was younger on a camp trip and I stopped by the gorilla enclosure. The gorillas were ambling and hooting loudly. For some reason, when they saw me, they seemed enchanted. 4 or 5 gorillas were staring at me and lounging nearby. They did not seem territorial. I played peekaboo with one of them and unfortunately did not get to see the other enclosures. It is a fond memory. Addendum. Chimpanzees did the same thing to me as I was walking out of the zoo. What did they want with me? What did they see in me? I am not sure, and I do not think we will ever know. Story 6. This is the story of how my mother reunited with her sister. My mother was born in the far east of Russia. Her father was a survivor of the gulags, and she was raised in a small settlement mainly populated by ex-prisoners and their families. Before my grandfather married, he survived a mine collapse and, while recovering, had an affair with a nurse that produced a child. After his release and settling down with my grandmother, he reached out and established contact with his daughter. They met a few times, and he even took my mother on several occasions to meet her. She lived in a city 5,000 kilometers to the south. But eventually, when the government allowed them to move, my mother's family relocated across the country. And because this was before cell phones and social media, they lost touch with my aunt. The last time my mother saw her, my mother was about 12 and my aunt about 20. About 17 years later, my mother was on the Moscow metro, taking my sister to music school. She saw a woman sitting across from her and, as she later described it, felt a gravitational pull toward her. She began staring, trying to figure out why it felt like she knew this person. Suddenly it clicked, and as the train pulled into my mother's stop, she got up, grabbed the woman and said, "Are you my aunt, the daughter of my grandfather? Get off the train with me now." Her intuition was right. That is how, after about 17 years of no contact, my mother reunited with her long-lost sister on a crowded Moscow metro train. Story 7. When I worked for the United States Forest Service, I was flown in with a wildland fire crew by helicopter to a remote mountaintop in the backwoods of Idaho. We were miles away from anything. In fact, when one of our crew cut through his boot with a chainsaw, it took about 6 hours to get him out, and that was with a medical evacuation. I was on a crew of young people, mostly women, assisting a crew of slightly older men. The only other woman on the mountain was the chief of their crew, Tara. My crew went to sleep first, and a couple of the older men stayed up drinking. From somewhere outside the firelight, they heard an awful blood-curdling scream, like a woman being tortured. They ran to see if it was my crew. It was not. Then they remembered their chief was sleeping in a hammock away from everyone else, so they ran to find her. When they arrived, they found Tara facing down a massive cougar. Though she was shouting obscenities at it, it was actually the cougar making those unearthly screams that echoed off the mountains. It continued to stalk her even when 3 people were there yelling at it, and even after they started a chainsaw to scare it off. Eventually, one of the men ran screaming at it with an axe like a berserker, and the cat backed off. I will never forget that scream. I will never forget realizing that for the cougar to spot Tara, label her as one of the weakest, and single her out as the only person not sleeping in a group, the cat must have been walking just outside the reach of the firelight for a long time. Story 8. My wife was on her first Zoom meeting in March in the kitchen. I asked if I could be off screen and cook breakfast quietly, and she said yes as long as I was not distracting. I ended up burning the food, which caused a lot of smoke. While I was trying to get the situation under control, the robe I was wearing fell onto the electric stove burner and started smoking. In effect, I had set myself on fire. To her credit, she maintained her composure and completely ignored me. We still laugh about it a year later. Story 9. My stepsister has significant mental and health issues. She is severely autistic, and many people assume she cannot function. Our stepmother, who was not either of our mothers but another wife, was horribly abusive when we were children, and she was worse to my sister because my sister could not vocalize it. Shortly after our grandparents got custody, my sister had enough. She walked downstairs, stared our stepmother in the eye, urinated everywhere, and then walked back upstairs. She knew exactly what she had done, and it was the funniest thing because the stepmother had to clean it. To this day, the stepmother acts as if my sister was a horrible person who simply did not like her. And every time she tells the story, I laugh because my sister endured so much, and that was her best screw you. Story 10. I have never seen a question that would let me tell this story. I was a production assistant on a stop-motion children's show. A big part of my job was buying supplies the workshop needed to build the sets and puppets. These kinds of workshops use whatever works and often come up with unorthodox shortcuts, like the time they sent me to an adult store at 9:30 in the morning to buy thumb cuffs because our cop puppet needed handcuffs and they were the perfect size. But that did not compare to my most amusing and embarrassing supply run. One afternoon, the animation director came up to me and said he needed me to go to the drugstore to buy the largest tube of KY jelly, a personal lubricant. In stop motion, KY jelly is used to simulate water because it stays put between frames and does not damage the paint. Our seamstress overheard and asked me, while I was at the drugstore, to get every pack of wet wipes they had. They are a safe way to clean the puppets and wardrobe, and we went through a lot of them. The woman in charge of making all the limbs piped up and asked me to get 6 pairs of white nylons while I was at it because they hold the magnets in the feet. So my shopping list was 1 extra large tube of KY jelly, a personal lubricant, 6 pairs of white nylons, every pack of wet wipes in the store. The look on the cashier's face when I dumped my basket out on the counter was priceless and, for me, fairly embarrassing. Story 11. My great-grandmother lived in a nursing home for the last years of her life. She was about 95 with very poor eyesight and hearing when this happened. My great-grandmother told my mother she was afraid of the woman in black. What woman in black? My mother asked. The one who stands at my bed every night. I think she is finally coming to get me. Naturally, my mother dismissed this as a figment of her grandmother's imagination. One evening, when my mother was visiting, my great-grandmother said, "I think I am going to die tonight. Can you stay? I don't want to be alone when the woman in black comes for me." So my mother stayed at the bedside, sleeping uncomfortably in an old armchair. Suddenly she awoke to a noise she could not immediately pinpoint and saw a figure in a long black gown standing at the far end of the bed. My mother's scream must have woken the whole nursing home and frightened the woman in black, who turned and ran into a nurse who came to investigate. It turned out the woman in black was my great-grandmother's bedridden and demented neighbor. Nobody knew she could actually walk, let alone dress in her favorite black dress and wander the nursing home at night. Apparently she had been seen by some of the other residents, who, fearing they would be thought crazy, simply never talked about the ghost that entered their rooms at night to stand at their beds and water their plants. Story 12. I was in the middle of a contract meeting when blood began pouring from a man's ear. He ran straight out the door without a word, and I was very worried. I am so glad he came back later that week and explained he had just had surgery on that ear. I sometimes wonder how I would have felt if he had never returned. I kept wondering what condition could cause that to happen out of the blue. Story 13. My family's pet growing up was named Arwen. She was a massive Airedale Terrier and the light of our lives. Truly the world's best dog. She herded the chickens and let the chicks nestle into her fur and nap as she sat quietly in the sunshine, not moving so the chicks would not be disturbed. Her most heroic act came when my brother Liam, about 10 at the time, was moving our basketball hoop and base into the yard for the summer. He did not notice 2 rattlesnakes coiled under the base, but Arwen did. She leapt in front of Liam, between him and the snakes. Liam and my father, who was nearby, saw both snakes strike. My father grabbed Liam, pulled him away, pulled Arwen aside with his other hand, then sent Liam to fetch a hatchet to dispatch the snakes. We took Arwen inside, put her on her bed, and called the veterinarian. The veterinarian said he would come out to put her down and that if she had been bitten by 2 snakes, there was basically no chance she would survive. My mother refused to put her down without a fight. She researched treatments and learned that giving the dog diphenhydramine, commonly known as Benadryl, can counteract snake venom. She did that. Arwen lay still, swollen and bleeding, for 3 days. Then she recovered, walked around, and lived 5 more years, dying at 17. She was the best dog. Story 14. I recently discovered my 75-year-old mother is autistic, and it has completely explained our interactions over the past couple of decades. Story 15. Back in high school, I worked as a kennel assistant at a veterinary office. One day we ran out of sink cleaner and other supplies needed for work, so my supervisor sent me to Walmart to restock. I put about 10 to 15 cans of Comet and a few jugs of Clorox into the cart and was headed to the other side of the store. As I rounded a corner, I almost collided with another woman's cart. She looked down and almost screamed, "Is there a sale on Comet?" Then she ran to the cleaning aisle to get more. I tried to catch her and explain it was for work, but she was determined to grab the rest of the Comet. If you were accidentally scammed by a teenager into buying a huge amount of Comet around 1984, please know I tried to stop you. Story 16. Once in high school, I had eaten some magic mushrooms right before my curfew. I went home, my family went to bed, and I was quietly enjoying myself in my bedroom. Suddenly I heard a massive boom, ear-shattering and earth-shaking. The mushrooms had fully kicked in and I looked around. wondering what was happening. I stayed still for a minute, waiting for fallout, but nothing happened. After a few minutes, I crept into the living room. The house was quiet, but the front door was wide open. Not knowing what to make of it, I warily looked out and saw people running down the street. Everyone in the house was still sleeping, including my mom, who was a notoriously light sleeper. I couldn't trust my judgment. Were the mushrooms hitting harder than I thought? Or was this the end of days? Not knowing, I went back to my room, gathered some blankets, and kept watch from the corner of the room, too scared to do anything else. That's where my mom found me asleep the next morning when she came in to tell me the neighbor's house had blown up. The neighbor was on vacation. There had been a slow gas leak, and when the refrigerator clicked on, boom, a fairly large home was reduced to rubble, and my family had slept right through it. Story 17. I was waiting for my takeout at a Chinese restaurant when a middle-aged man stormed in, complaining that he'd been waiting 30 minutes outside for them to bring him his spaghetti. The restaurant staff explained that he might have been looking for the Italian restaurant next door, but he wouldn't have any of it. He screamed for 5 minutes, climaxing with the line, "What the hell do you know? I have a master's degree." Shortly after, his wife called asking where he was, and he started blaming the staff. She yelled at him, he got sheepish, then slunk out the door to the Italian restaurant next door. It was hilarious to witness, but I felt sorry for the waitstaff, so I left a 40% tip. It's now an inside family joke to say, "I have a master's degree." When things start getting heated, it usually calms things down pretty quickly. Story 18. When I was about 12 or 13, I was camping in my backyard watching the stars, hoping to see a meteor or two. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a satellite moving across the sky from right to left. From the corner of my other eye, I saw another satellite appear on the horizon and move upward. I saw the speed they were both traveling and realized that if they kept their current speed and trajectory, at least to my eye, they were going to hit each other. I watched them get closer and closer until finally they were about to cross paths. They intersected and suddenly there was a quick bright flash, and then neither of them was there anymore. I have often thought about what I saw. I know the odds that I watch two satellites collide and obliterate each other are basically zero, but I cannot think of any other explanation for what I saw that night. Edit. This gained a lot of attention. Thanks to Reddit user Cirxes, I may be getting closer to an answer. The timelines work out for it to have potentially been the August 1996 collision between the French Cerise military reconnaissance satellite and debris from an Ariane rocket. I would need to know where the collision happened relative to the ground. If it was over the northeastern United States, that might fit. I find it hard to believe that a piece of space debris would be reflective enough to appear in the night sky as a satellite, but this is closer than I have ever gotten to an answer, so I am running with it until someone finds a better one. A follow-up from Reddit user Cirxes suggests the geolocation does not match. The crash happened over the Indian Ocean and I was in New England at the time. The search continues. Story 19. Pulled a stranger's dildo out of my pocket at the pub. I went to buy a new jacket at Target. I tried on one from the rack, but it was one size too small. I grabbed the next size up, went straight to the counter and paid for it. The cashier put it in the bag. I went home and left the bag on the table. The next night, my friends arrived unannounced to grab me to go to the pub. I dressed quickly, grabbed the bag with the jacket, jumped in the car, and we headed out. After a few drinks, we decided to head home. It was definitely jacket weather, so I put the jacket on. The others teased me about how fancy it looked. I put my hand in the pocket and found an object. I had no idea what it was or how it had gotten there. I pulled it out in front of everyone. There I was, standing outside the pub in my new jacket with a stranger's dildo in my hand and no idea how it got there. Of course, nobody believed me. Almost 20 years later, I am still curious about the events that led someone to hide a dildo in a jacket on the rack at Target, why they did not return to get it, and what their reaction was if they came back and could not find the jacket. Story 20. One of my favorite stories to tell. Pure shenanigans. As a teenager, I was part of an iconic trio with Patrick and Pinky. When we got older, we moved around and often hung out in pairs. It was hard to coordinate all three of us. About 5 years ago, we were finally free just after Christmas and decided to meet at our favorite spot, Denny's. Patrick had been dating a girl I did not like. She was mean, they fought a lot, and it was a very toxic relationship. Pinky had made a painting of Patrick and her as a Christmas present and brought it to the restaurant. We were filming ourselves being silly when Patrick announced that his girlfriend was trying to get pregnant. My reaction on tape was, "Why?" I laughed. We then had a serious talk with them about how that was a terrible idea. They opened up about how they were feeling and about their relationship, and we were basically trying to convince them to break up. But then we had this ridiculous painting. What were we going to do with it? It was awkward. Pinky and I went into the women's restroom. The only thing on the wall was a nail. We hung the painting on it and it fit perfectly. The colors even matched the bathroom style. We left it there for years and each of us would visit it whenever we were in town. Apparently Denny's closed down a while back, but the painting was saved and now lives at Patrick's brother's house. Story 21. I once gave the singer Meat Loaf 2 awkward handshakes. This was a few years back when conventions and handshakes were a thing. Meat Loaf arrived at his booth and went down the line to personally shake hands with everyone. Unexpectedly, he offered handshakes with his left hand. I am right-handed, and when it was my turn my brain had a meltdown. Instead of using my left hand, I extended both hands and awkwardly cupped his. I realized my mistake and did not commit to the cupping, so it was loose. One thing that makes handshakes worse is when they are limp. He returned to his booth and began signing autographs. Eventually, I made my way forward and got my autograph. Once again, he offered his left hand. This time I first extended my right hand, noticed, said "oh," and then offered my left hand correctly. He shook it, and I left with my autograph and a new story to tell. He was very nice and friendly to his fans and never mentioned my handshake blunders. Story 22. I've shared this before, but my friend from grad school had been a skydiving instructor in Colorado and had jumped more than 600 times. One time, for some reason, he had his wallet in his suit and it fell out. He figured there was absolutely no chance of finding it. Separately, a man in rural Colorado was found murdered. In the remote cabin where he lived with his daughter, he had been sexually abusing her and she finally had enough and killed him. The police searched the house and all of his property and found my friend's wallet in the trunk of his car. The police assumed the murderer had carelessly left the wallet in the trunk, making the arrest easy. My friend had a very believable alibi. It could not have been him because the wallet had fallen out of his pants while he was skydiving. My friend was never arrested, but he was questioned and had to have his story corroborated. From what I remember, the cops knew early on that it was the daughter, so she might have confessed, though that is speculation. The sexual abuse and self-defense details came out later. When the cops cleared my friend, they told him the father had taken all of his cash. They had no idea why he had kept the wallet. Story 23. Back in early 2018, when I first moved to Utah to start school, I was at a 7-Eleven when a girl asked me for directions to the train station. I pointed her in the right direction, but she was walking. I figured, fuck it. I had an hour until class, so I offered her a ride. She told me she had been studying or volunteering for months in Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, or another Spanish-speaking country. She said she came out here to explore and had moved in with an old high school friend who turned out to be unstable and flipped out on her. She had to jump out of his truck because he would not pull over. She planned to take a bus home but had left her wallet at his place. I said let's go grab it quickly, but he followed us. I made a quick U-turn and left. We ended up leaving everything there because I feared he might try to harm us. I let her use my charger so she could contact her parents to get money for a ticket home, and I sent her on her way. I had to get to class, so I left in a hurry after dropping her off at the station and did not get her information to confirm she made it home safely. I never got her name, but I know she was headed to somewhere in the Midwest. If this sounds familiar and you remember a buff, bearded Mexican man in a white Volkswagen hatchback helping you, please let me know you are okay. It has been on my mind forever because I never knew what happened after I left. Okay, I get it. Puerto Rico is part of the United States. Story 24. When I was a child, I thought the phrase bust a nut meant the same as break a sweat, or to exert myself heavily. I remember one day telling my older sister that I had busted a nut, After cleaning the house and seeing the look of confusion and concern on her face, I did not learn what that actually meant until years later. I am female, by the way. Edit. Thank you for the awards, you all. I am glad I could make you laugh. I later mentioned the story to my older sister. She had no recollection of it, but the memory has always stayed with me. Story 25. One time I was walking across campus, stoned. I walked by two kids, maybe 10 and 5 years old, about 20 meters away. I wasn't sure why they were there without an adult. The younger one looked at me and yelled, "Hey, I like your shirt." I said, thanks." He responded, "And your backpack is okay." I did not respond. The older one yelled, "He's working on his compliments." We each continued on our way. A few hundred meters later, a man about my age walked up carrying a tray of cookies and said, "Hey, do you want a cookie?" I replied, "Yes, I'd love a cookie." "What's the cookie for?" He said, "No reason, just handing out cookies. Do you want two?" I said, "Yes, I'd love 2 cookies. Thanks a lot, buddy." I took 2 cookies and they were excellent. It was a pretty good walk. Story 26. Once, when I was 7, I had a substitute teacher who fell and hurt herself while walking with me. She went to the nurse and did not tell any of the other teachers. During lunch they asked me where she was, and she never returned. I assume she may have been let go for not informing anyone that she could not teach for the rest of the day. It is basically a fever dream memory at this point. I hope she is okay now. Story 27. I haven't told this story in a while, but Uber Eats scammed me out of $2,000 plus and ruined my 20th birthday. It was almost my first birthday on my own. I did not celebrate with my family because I was a 5-hour drive away at college. It also fell on a Tuesday, so I could not do anything with friends. The plan was to grab dinner at an Indian restaurant that Friday to celebrate. I got out of class early, and my only celebration was to order food from the International House of Pancakes through the Uber Eats app. It was only my 3rd time using it. I ordered chicken tenders for $16, then took a 5-hour nap. I woke up around 8 p.m. after all the food places on campus had closed. I figured it was my birthday and ordered out again. I tried to get chicken nuggets from McDonald's delivered. I pressed confirm order. The page loaded, and I got an error. Strange, I tried again. Another error and then another. I googled the error code and saw that it appears when a card gets declined. That could not be right. The meal cost about $13, and at that time I had about $1,000 in my bank account. For anyone with a student wallet through PNC Bank, you know it is basically 3 accounts in one. A checking account and 2 savings accounts linked together. As a broke college student, this was literally all I had to survive on. So I checked my bank. Every account had been cleared out. $0 across the board. I had over 30 different pending transactions, all from Uber Eats. They ranged from 99 cents to $104. And they continued until every account was emptied. I was sitting at negative $600 by the time I checked. I was freaking out. My bank was closed, so I could not call them. I contacted Uber Eats customer service. They asked me to list every transaction, which I did. They confirmed the transactions came from them. Then the agent told me that these were just temporary holds that they always do, and the money would not actually leave my account. But there were over 30 transactions. I spent hours trying to figure out what went wrong in their system, and each agent kept giving me the same copy and pasted response. The charges would not post to my account. Just wait. The thing is, with debit cards, pending transactions are treated as if the money is already gone, so I could not use my funds. I was helpless. The next morning I called my bank as soon as they opened. My card was canceled, and they had to dispute each charge. There were so many that they could not all fit in one report and had to split them into 3. Usually when you dispute a transaction, the bank gives you a provisional credit, a temporary refund. They could only issue a provisional refund on one report, which still left me at about negative $150. I would have to wait about 2 months for the investigation to end to get the rest of my money back. And the money did leave my account. Not only that, I was hit with about 10 overdraft fees of $35 each for the transactions that bounced. When I went back to Uber Eats about this, they kept repeating that the transactions would not post. They had already posted. That entire week was a mess. I was stranded at college with literally no money. My family struggles enough, and my mom had to skip a few bills to send me cash through MoneyGram. I could not have money come through my bank account because it would be eaten by all the fees I had accrued. I even canceled the get-together that Friday, though we were able to go in the end. Happy birthday to me. Fuck Uber Eats. Story 28. I love my backpack. It's nothing fancy, just a bog-standard Element rucksack, but I picked it out and it is the only fashion brand item I own. I remember the kids in my middle school flipping out over Element gear back in the day, so it brings back fond memories. A couple of years ago, I was backpacking and road tripping across Canada. We stopped at Hope, British Columbia, for a bite to eat before continuing on to Kelowna, where we had booked accommodation for a couple of nights. I do not quite remember how, but when we arrived around 9 p.m. and unpacked the car, I could not find my backpack. It had everything in it: passport, house keys, iPad, Canadian currency, my favorite sweatshirt, phone charger. I feared the worst, that we had forgotten to lock the car while in the cafe and someone had taken it, because I could not remember bringing it with me into the shop. I did not get much sleep that night. The next day I called the diner, just in case I had left it inside. The nicest girl answered and said there was a backpack there. I asked if she could send it to Kelowna and take the cost from the cash envelope in the bag. She agreed immediately and I hung up, relieved. Unfortunately, being a weekend, it did not arrive before we were due to leave the area on a 7-day camping trip through Alberta down the Icefields Parkway. I asked the Airbnb owner if they could forward my backpack to our next stop in Calgary, to a United Parcel Service drop-off point, and to help themselves to some cash. She agreed, and I left on a week-long trip with no signal, camping in the Rockies. It was a great week. I nearly forgot I was missing almost everything I would have needed to get home to Europe. I remember finally understanding what Bilbo says in The Lord of the Rings. I want to see mountains again, Gandalf, mountains, and then find somewhere where I can rest. I still wish I could go back and do it all over. Leaving Banff, though, I came back down to earth with a bump. We got to Calgary on Canada Day, so everything was closed, which meant another night of worrying. The next day, I was first in line at the United Parcel Service to pick up my parcel. It was such a relief seeing the familiar shade of burgundy when I opened it, and everything was there, minus about $40 in shipping costs. Whenever I look at my bag, I remember how kind people can be when you just ask for help. They went out of their way to help a stranger get his bag back, and I remember all the more vividly that wonderful trip through an amazing country. Story 29. One late night coming home from an evening out, my husband, a friend of ours, and I rounded the corner to the stairs that led to our apartment when we saw it. About halfway up the stairs sat an opossum eating a sandwich. He was sitting like a person on his haunches, with his little feet sticking out, and in his hands was a Subway 6-inch sandwich, still in the paper but slightly unwrapped. It really looked like a tiny person in an opossum suit. Everything he did seemed oddly human. We stood there for what felt like ages, watching him and trying to decide what to do. There was no way we were going to risk walking past him, so we took the long way around to the second set of stairs. I will never forget that opossum. It was a truly surreal moment. Era, oh my goodness. Thank you for the awards. For everyone asking about photos. This happened around 2003, so cameras were not in everyone's pocket yet. If it happened today, I would be sharing video of the funky little man and his sandwich. Story 30. My father has gotten into a fistfight with a raccoon, a buck, a turkey, and a goat, all on separate occasions, and at this point I'm scared of the thought of him going somewhere with more dangerous animals, such as Alaska or Australia. Since people were asking and my phone finally allowed me to make paragraphs, here are the details. A turkey bit my sibling when he was 5, and my dad somehow got it into his drunken mind that he needed to defend my brother's honor by fighting the turkey. The raccoon had repeatedly gotten into the chicken coop, so my dad moved the chickens into the garage and staked out the coop for the creature. Good news. He found the raccoon and had a rifle handy. Bad news. The raccoon had rabies, and it turns out it's pretty hard to aim a rifle in a small, enclosed space while trying to dodge a raccoon trying to launch itself at your leg. I don't know where he shot it, but it wasn't going down easily, and he had to resort to punching it off his hip. The goat was our senior, brain-damaged goat named Ozzy. If you want to know what he looked like, imagine if all the 80s shag carpeting had a baby with a goat. I mentioned the brain damage because no goat with a quarter of a functioning brain cell would go from peaceful to completely berserk in 10 seconds and try to ram then stomp my dad like Ozzy did, or get intimate with a tire swing, but that's a story for another time. They both made it out okay. My dad had multiple hoof-shaped bruises, and Ozzy had to wear the pool noodles of shame on his horns, among other precautions. I know we probably should have gotten rid of Ozzy at that point. He was in his twilight years, and we didn't want him spending it being shipped around or slaughtered. Story 31. About 5 years ago, I was walking with a guy I used to hang out with. We were crossing the street in the crosswalk when he said that even if we got hit, it would not be our fault, and we were immediately hit by a large truck. I flew through the air, which was actually liberating for someone with a fear of heights. I kept my eyes closed. I hit the ground about 3 feet from a large stone pillar that would have killed me. I stood up, checked on him, walked to the driver who had hit us and, dead serious, asked if his truck was okay. I walked away with no injuries. The guy I had been with had a cracked pelvic bone and later turned out to be a sex offender. I love telling that story. Story 32. I was in 3rd grade when the teacher said the first 5 students to hand in their classwork would receive the highest grade. For students handed in their notebooks, I was walking to the teacher with my completed work when I saw a girl ahead of me with hers, and then I threw my work onto the teacher's desk. The teacher accepted my work, and the girl was sad. Story 33. My grandparents have lived out in the country since they married 60 years ago, and they built the house they still live in today. At some point, the neighbor's house burned down. They did not rebuild and sold the land. Eventually, my grandparents came to own about 1/8 of that land. Nobody ever did anything with it, so over decades it grew mature trees, grasses, fruit trees, and berry bushes. My grandfather expanded their property line in 2 directions to have extra grass, and he maintained a walking trail on the land. Everything was green and refreshing compared with the drab, flat farmland for miles around. I grew up at my grandparents' house. I picked berries with my dad and made jams and pies. My cousins and I played in an abandoned barn and a storage silo from the original house that stood there. The land was sold 1 to 2 years ago because the owners were aging. I recently visited, and the new owners had completely razed it. There is no grass and no trees. It is completely flat now. They are also trying to rezone the land from residential farmland to industrial zoning so they can build a factory. They are attempting to regain that extra land my grandfather had claimed, which runs down the center of the mature pine trees he planted 30 years ago as a windbreak, and includes their garden. It is depressing because I have only ever known that land as green and flourishing, and my grandparents have enjoyed 60 years of peace and quiet. If the plan succeeds, they will spend the rest of their days looking at a factory next door and a road running immediately behind their house. There goes the peace and quiet. Story 34. Back in high school in 2010 and 2011, my buddies and I would get together on weekends to watch and laugh at shitty movies. One day a friend brought a movie he rented from a Redbox. It was by far the worst movie we had seen. It was called either Hellraisers or Hellrisers, not to be confused with the popular body horror classic. This one was an absolute piece of shit. It was about a monk, a Knight Templar, and a ninja fighting vampire-like demons in the desert. We all remember the movie and specific plot points, but in the years since we have never been able to find proof of its existence. We searched long and hard but always came up empty. It is like my friend group's personal Bigfoot sighting. Story 35. When I was about 15, I went to the cinema with my older brother and we bought some pick and mix sweets. While we were paying, I said to him, "I guarantee that weighs 375 grams. I had absolutely no idea what 375 grams felt like to hold, but for some reason I said it. The man put it on the scales and boom, 375 grams. Life has never been that good since. That was 18 years ago. Story 36. A few weeks ago, I was driving and a motorcycle was about 20 feet in front of me with a couple and their son on it. When we were making a 90-degree turn, it lost control and they fell. As soon as I realized they were falling, my perception went into slow motion, like the bullet scene in The Matrix. In the split second the bike lost control, I estimated the distance between us, how fast I was going, how much I needed to brake to avoid hitting them, whether I could swerve right to be sure I would not hit them, and I checked for any vehicles overtaking me. There was another bike. All the while the woman was falling as if in slow motion. As soon as she hit the road and I braked hard, everything returned to normal and my tire stopped a few inches from her head. There was another brief moment when everything felt faster than normal, but it was small. Everyone was safe. Story 37. This happened when I was 11. While doing the dishes, I rinsed a heavy mortar and pestle and placed it on the countertop. It moved by itself from one end to the other horizontally at least 4 feet. The sight was so shocking I almost collapsed. My mouth went dry and I was both processing it and thinking how to tell everyone I had seen what looked like a ghost or demon. When I steadied myself, I realized it was water, not a ghost, that made the mortar slide so freely across the countertop. I felt disappointed. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.